Hello, I'm Dr. Bond. This is the Bond Report, and this is the Word of the Week. And I had an administrator, an excellent guy, a good friend of mine, wonderful guy, excellent administrator, very good guy. And he regarded himself as a connoisseur of many things, perhaps not everything, but it certainly seemed like a lot of things, particularly wine. Now, this was not a universal opinion or even a particularly widely shared opinion, but he did hold it with some vigor and occasionally, and he would be right about a lot of things, if only by accident, but he did know a good deal about many things. But once again, Voltaire, I don't mean this to sound as cynical as it probably does, but a great guy as long as he's, providing he really is dead, a great humanitarian, close personal friend of mine. But the habits is how I believe the bad habits started, was he was a keen reader of the What's Happening Now school of literature, which would involve a lot of magazines, which would involve things like wine periodicals that he would subscribe to and read closely. He wanted to know what was happening now. And then that kind of literature, it's well known that that kind of literature has got, kind of a sad effect on perhaps impressionable minds. And it goes back, there would be Wine Spectator. He'd have half a dozen of these he'd subscribe to. They'd be around his house. And there was no something for dummies then, that's computer age, but it would be kind of, to me, French wine for dummies. He would do that. We're used to new words in medicine. New words don't scare us. We get them all the time. So we're probably the most jargon rich of any profession, including law. Incomprehensible jargon is the hallmark of a profession. Certainly medicine, we're probably the leaders in that. Kingman Brewster here was the head of Yale when Gary Trudeau was there, which is why he'll crop up in Doonesbury every so often. But he did say that, incomprehensible jargon. This is the habit. About once a month, he would come up with, how and where, God knows, he would come up with some new word, and that new word meant everything. Now, new words are in themselves an excellent habit. There's laudable, that's a great thing. It shows your self-improvement, shows you're doing things for yourself. And that habit should be respected, perhaps even emulated. And that's a great thing, but this wasn't what that was. This was not at all. This was you'd glance at a word. About once a month he'd have that, but he would have one of these words that would come out. And I'm picturing Rosemary's Baby here. He would, giving birth to, during this gestation period, you're forming a new kind of evil demon type word, which I'll get to what that means later on. And it was like the very devil himself whispering in his ear. It's not an excellent habit to just do this and overwhelm people. Words have context. Words have meaning. The word, for instance, use it in a sentence. That means something different to a teacher than it does to a judge. And it's situational, it's positional. Words vary in their meanings. And Voltaire has this. This was a certain style of things, and all styles are good except for the tiresome ones. And this would be kind of amusing at first, but it would become tiresome fairly quickly. Now, my girls would say, where does he get these words from? And I'd say, I've always pictured kind of maternity word for demons. There'd be these words out there you're going to select, but they're going through a life cycle. They're getting ready to be predictable. They're getting, forming, doing these things. I think that they exist because here's a photo of one actually happening. This is an actual New Jersey devil embracing a child. I mean, there the thing is right there. You can see it. It's for real. Stephen Wright saying, what's another word for thesaurus? A thesaurus will just list them like you're building a pyramid, stacking one block on top of another. For instance, the word hate. People will throw that around. You read in there, it's hate, loathe, detest, abhor. Those words don't mean the same thing. Hate implies a little bit of fear, perhaps, and there's a tiny bit of respect in there for the actual word hate. Abhor means almost physical. Just abhor something is more of an abstract notion. Loathe is passive. You sit and you silently loathe something that's happening, but you're letting it go on, just loathing it. It's passive. Detest is more active. You want to say something to it. Despise is you look down on it. These words have shades of meaning. They're not exactly the same thing. Now, yeah, they're kind of a synonym, but they tend to have some precision to them in the English language. that people don't always learn out of a thesaurus. Now, the new word, which would give birth to a new word, and it came to be called by my staff the word of the week. Now, it tended to be about 2.5 weeks, but it was just called the word of the week. Everybody knew what it meant. And it was typically went through a distinct and predictable life cycle. Now, it tended to start strong. It's all you saw. And then it would slack off just a little for about the first week, middle of the first week. It would kind of get quiet for a while. There'd be a little lull when presumably it's pupating, and then it would come back a little weakly, rebreed, and it would be gone. It would be kind of more of a larval stage and then pupate. You get this weak adult phase where I guess it's reproducing, and then it'd be gone again. And that was the typical life cycle. As a biology major, you're looking for those. It would expire unlamented. You were pretty sick of the word by that time. And then would follow a gestation period of a variable length until something, till the next one came along. And and it would come on, and we're going to cover that. It wouldn't come on quietly. It would come on like a juggernaut, come in some cartoon. And we mapped the life cycle. Now, I started with the ladybug, and there's an actually benign life cycle, but the actual life cycle in real life tended to be more like the fly. It's annoying at every stage. They've got annoying adults, they've got maggots, they've got eggs. The whole thing is just kind of hateful. And so it's more of the fly, the life cycle, the mosquito, deadly animals that wear you down, that cause things. This was more of these life cycle, but it was a predictable, typically life cycle, and it tended to go for about these times fairly predictably. The word of the week was to be expected. A long one was 3 weeks, a short one was about 2 weeks, and there you'd be with your word. The first sentence of Metamorphosis, when Kafka wrote that, is, Gregor Samsa woke to find he'd been transformed into a giant insect. And so there he is. There's the new word coming out of bed, the new insect of the next 2 or 3 weeks, transformed from God knows where. Now, the new word, occasionally it would be a phrase, usually it was a word, and it would come on from God knows where, out of nowhere, but it wouldn't be lightly sprinkled in the conversation. It wouldn't start out slow with subtle whiffs of whatever vapor this was. It tended to come on blunt instruments, clue game style, like a bulldozer or a bludgeon or a candlestick. In fact, half of the murder weapons in Clue are blunt instruments. It tended to come on like a blunt instrument all at once, some murderous blunt instrument. It tended to come on like this pack of drones here. It was everywhere at once. All of a sudden, the whole thing took over. Everything was word this, word that. Boy, isn't this very word? It's just like a word. Isn't that just like these words? Word, word, word. And then it would take over everything, kudzu style, or deadly virus style. Everything was shaped around whatever that word was, but it wouldn't always have a particular meaning. A piece of bad news wrapped in a protein, Peter Medawar's definition of a virus. It tended to come all at once. The hallmark, though, of the word of the week was that he never, ever knew what the damn word meant. It would be used in total oblivion. It's whatever he happened to read in the Wine Spectator. And this word now is the universal word, noun, verb, adjective. Isn't that just like whatever it was? And he himself would never look this up. He would just pound you over the head with whatever this word was. Isn't that just like this? I tried to watch The Princess Bride, and I remember doing that. You keep using that word. I do not think you know what it means. And so you just kind of do what people do as you get to be an adult. You put your head down and wait for it to be over. It's kind of like you're not going to fight with a tornado or something. What do? You go in the basement, wait till the noise stops, So on occasion, it would seem like it would never stop. It would swarm in there. He'd never know what it meant. And you'd put up with it until it went for a long time. And actually, the meaning would crop up in ways he didn't understand. He'd use that in some sentence, and it was like listening to this beatnik poetry. You'd lit this messing word, and it would have this odd little meaning, and you're starting to look into that like it's some of this Maynard G. Krebs poetry recitation, beatnik poem New York City circa, 1959, and they'd be in there reading their bad poetry of this and that and Scooby-Doo and Scooby-Dee, Scooby-Da. And there'd be some glancing ricochet of an idea, and you'd think, boy, your brain's trying to get meaning out of these things, and you'd think, oh, this guy's deep. This guy's really a poet. What's he trying to say here? And I really guess you got to pay more attention to this guy, when actually it was just kind of the onslaught of this. Now, here we have the author of this. I always thought of this as coming from wine. Typically, the typical probably 8.5, 9 out of 10 of these would be Wine Spectator, to name one magazine, type of words. But he'd throw an occasional one in there that wouldn't be in Wine Spectator, and I'd wonder where that happened from. And another irritating one that was on top of that is he'd just stack them on there like a pyramid, like they'll do in wine magazines. I actually picked up one and read one time, something, the harmonious harmony of something. You can't make that up. And I think I just dropped that like it was burning my fingers. I mean, this is not only meaningless, but it's stacking one meaning like some pyramid of meaninglessness, where you're just stacking one block on top of another and hoping they turn into something else, which, like off the top of my head, I compiled just a list of Wine Spectator words I could have gone on, but things that you don't see how they apply to wine. And you just push them, you're just throwing words at the wall. And Rich would pick one of these words and just beach over the head. Everything was, I'll pick one, ethereal. Everything was moving. It had kind of an asymmetric flavor to it. And your brain's trying to make a meaning out of that, like beatnik poetry. Calvin and Hobbes. Calvin says it the best: inflate meanings where they're not there. Just the key to writing is to use words to not express things, but to do almost the opposite. And I think this is a brilliant cartoon. The beatnik poetry thing of that seemed to require like a Mitch Hedberg voice. I thought of this one time going, man, he'd be listening to that and going, man, this cat is deep. This cat's got a poet. Maybe I'll write some poetry myself. Scooby-Dee, Scooby-Da. Maybe I'll write for a wine, Català. Maybe I wrote some poetry there. It needed a Mitch Hedberg voice and a kind of a, wow, that's deep. Well, it would be trippy. I'd say trippy, but that would be anachronistic, Anachronistic. You can't say trippy, but I would say it's deep. You get lost in these things and it never comes out. I actually saw this in a store, the No Bullshit wine book, and I remember thinking at the time, the No Bullshit wine book has got to be the world's lightest and thinnest book ever. Because you take all the bullshit out of that, it's just gone. I mean, it's like, I gave him an enema and I buried him in a shoebox, an old punchline of an old joke. I mean, it's all bullshit. The thing was, in BAFA, by assholes, for assholes, you are in BAFA heaven writing for wine connoisseur, wine periodical magazine, giving wine reviews. You yourself are an asshole writing asshole literature for assholes to read, for them to talk about, read, discuss, look at, saying, this is BAFA heaven times 3 cubed. I mean, it's just everywhere. This is as good as it gets. Bullshitters writing bullshit for other bullshitters to repeat. I mean, this is BAFA piled on. Once again, we use the pyramid analogy, but there's like 8 layers of BAFA there. This is the home of BAFA itself. Classic James Thurber cartoon. It's a domestic wine without much breeding, but I think you'll be amused by its pretension. It's all right there, I'm going to have a winesmanship kind of thing coming up on this, but the words themselves don't always correlate with any meaning at all. The guy thinks they do. He's making up his meaning as he goes along in his head. It might be different next time. My text is actually better than what I'm reading, and please read my text if you go through this, because I wrote some. It's pretty good. Orwell talks about this. He said, particularly in art criticism, literary criticism, I'm thinking of wine criticism because that's more my level. He said, particularly there's long passages which are entirely without meaning, totally meaningless, And he says you try to read that and you're no wiser than you were. In fact, it might take away, it might detract from the sum total of your knowledge if you actually read one of these and try to process it. Well, I had the hypothesis, the working hypothesis, that Rich would get these all the words of the week were coming out of a wine periodical that he happened to get that day or that week. And that would be applicable to everything. And that would be the random word. And here would be the guys there in the striped shirts picking out that word with their wine with them, but not all of them fit that pattern. So my hypothesis wasn't quite into a science. My hypothesis did not explain the odd words, like occasionally, and I'll use this later, cyberspace, which is not out of a wine catalog, I don't think. And that word would crop up. So the theory, therefore, if you're trying to think like science, is faulty and or incomplete. My theory does not explain all of the data, although it explains probably 8.59 out of 10 of the words sounded like they had come from some sort of wine literature, if that's the word. And therefore they would be that, but they didn't account for this. And here we have, once again, in the Orwell mood, the Ministry of Truth. So my hypothesis did not explain all of the observed phenomena. It wasn't quite to the level of science. How did this happen? How would a new word of the week, although they're longer, how would a new word of the week come, where did that come from? Where did they come from? And I actually have a theory on that, but evidently, now this was the cyberspace one, when it wasn't necessarily out of, not every word was out of a wine catalog. He had cyberspace one time, and he'd talk about cyberspace in such a way that told you he didn't understand what the word meant at all, or not even the context of it. For instance, I'm sitting and having lunch with him and his wife in a local restaurant, and he was talking about where he misplaced something, and she asked him where it had gone. He said, I don't know, it just came and flew off into cyberspace. And she gave him the look that I was mentally giving him and might have been giving him physically, but flew off into cyberspace as if, well, the example there was limbo, as if that's some suburb of limbo and it just goes off where you don't find it. Well, that might make sense in that context, but that's not what the damned word means, you know? And so this would happen all the time. It would be the context where you happen to find it, and so that word was applicable everywhere. And it's not here. For instance, there's no limbo for a lot of other things. And limbo is not a horrible place. It's for the unbaptized children and for the righteous pagan and the other things like that. So they had kind of not a halfway house, but another thing. But limbo was not actually a neighborhood. See, I knew it was, you had to know it was limbo, because when you hear the average really bad wine snob talk, you'd say, well, if God's hearing this, he'd send you straight to hell. There'd be no limbo. And finally, I decided it would be some kind of idle cocktail party type chatter or conversation in a restaurant. You'd hear a word, and you know how you say, well, gee, you learn something every day. Well, you do learn something every day, but a lot of the time what you learn today is that what you learned yesterday was bullshit. And so that is learning, but I mean, so that's where I think that came from, is just the random pitter-patter of everyday life, where you'd get a word from and you'd take it for the context that was from. I guess that's where everybody gets them. You adapt to this. You get to the idea that, gee, everything is going to be Epicurean for something for a while. It's going to be, and that'll be a verb and a noun and everything. But you kind of work it into your life. Let's keep moving. There's nothing to see here. A guy's using a word that doesn't mean that, but, you know, you're used to it. There's nothing to see here, folks. Let's move on. It's all over now. Never was anything. Well, you know, there's nothing to see here, folks. Let's just keep moving. Let's go on. And you do get accustomed to that. Now, in my own case, in fact, Harry Truman said this one time, and I didn't move that, when you keep talking and the other guy's just nodding his head, he said, that's the time to stop talking. When you find yourself, when you can actually hear your eyes starting to roll, that's the time to change the subject, move on to something else. When you feel your whole head slipping it, that's the time to go home. So we do that. Now, the modern context, interestingly, the more modern people will overuse a word or take it out of context also and beat it to death. And so it'll become meaningless, like words are when they're overused. I'm thinking of awesome here, where they lose all meaning. And they're all trying to do that. And I think this meaningless quality might have been what subliminally drove Rich to it. It didn't mean anything he knew. Really, I think the trouble started where Rich would start to, he would exhaust the words that had the wine literature meanings, and would be kind of understood dimly by the audience that were overly freighted with meaning to begin with. They'd been used in this kind of patois for a long time. And then you would start to slip over into words that had not had the meaning beat out of them yet. And they'd start to have these kind of oblique, odd meanings. And it's like the bullet glancing off there and going in some weird direction, like some ricochet, where you throw some word in there that didn't mean that, but you'd get your beatnik poetry meaning and think, I know, this cat's deep, but that thing did have a meaning. And, that wasn't the one he meant, but you wouldn't get there. Now, that was the start. These are the seeds of its destruction, the tragic flaw. And it's going to start to catch up with that because you can't do that forever. And nobody knew it at the time, but the habit was wearing itself out. And when you see this man on the screen, sometime before the end of that movie, they're going to straighten things out and justice is going to be done. And that was the first little appearance. Now, the seeds of the downfall in there, where Clint Eastwood is going to be way before the end of this movie, are coming. Now, how did the downfall start? Now, this is a phrase from Hemingway in 1926, The Sun Also Rises. Mike Campbell is with one of his friends, and the sun also rises. And he'd gone broke, and he'd done things, and the friend's asking him, well, how'd you go broke, Mike? And he said, I went broke two ways. First gradually, and then suddenly. And that's how the downfall came. It came gradually, and then suddenly. And so we're going to do this. The last three words of the week in order were the last one was penultimate, poignant, cyberspace, and penultimate. And here we have Tinker to Evers to Chance, old-time Chicago Cubs when they won 3 out of 4 World Series. And that was Tinker, Evers, and Chance. And Franklin P. Adams wrote some doggerel in there, Tinker to Evers to Chance. Those are the three words. We go in there, these are the fleeter than birds and, bear cubs, trio of bear cubs and fleeter than birds. Tinker to Evers to Chance, poignant to cyberspace to penultimate, because I remember that being it. Penultimate, in fairness to him and everybody, penultimate's one of those words that looks like it means a lot more than it does. Penultimate when you look at it on the page or hear the sound of it, it looks like it's something grand and big, like it's something ultimate and even a little beyond. And so it sounds like a superlative of some kind, of you're taking ultimate and raising it to the next level. But in this sad world, it doesn't mean that. It means next to the last. That's all it's ever meant. That's all it ever has meant. And there's one meaning and one meaning only, not one of those words like that's got like 80 definitions in the dictionary. It means next to the last. It doesn't matter how it sounds. It doesn't matter how it looks. It sounds like it would be something fantastic. It's not. And it's a shame, but there you go. So when that started, as we're starting to do our countdown, which I privately think of as the countdown, when everything was poignant for a while, which is always a word that's irritated me for whatever reason I have. Now, I remember my feelings on penultimate, which turned out to be the very last one. Ironically, not the very second to last, but the very last one. It's got a little bit of irony, I guess. And I just kind of did what, donkey in the hailstorm, you plant your feet and you stand and take it. And that's your defense. And I just waited for that one to be over. How long can it take? Well, gee, it's a 2.5 weeks, 3 weeks. The thing will run through its life cycle. It'll be gone. Grit your teeth, grin and bear it. Wait for the meaning. The old-time German speaker, the joke, the translator's waiting for the verb. Let it go on and go. And so I bided my time. I waited. I waited a little more. I strove for more patience. I asked for more patience. I wanted and needed some more patience. And I'm soldiering on. And how long can 2.5 weeks, 3 weeks be? Edmund Burke said that in something. But there is a point, he said, at which forbearance ceases to be a virtue. And as we get to our Clint Eastwood metaphor, we're going on there. It turned it out to be Rich's all-time favorite word of the week. Nothing was ever more favorite with that. Even everything was penultimate, like it usually would be, with the penultimate experience, the penultimate solution, the penultimate idea, the penultimate, penultimate. Justice is coming. You're going to do this. And then one day, I remember this, and as we're soldiering on, we go past the 3-week life cycle, but the water is still dripping on your head. And week 4, week 5, week 6 go by. No sign of slacking or even slowing down. And all the time, you're getting worn down gradually. And then suddenly, on the 3rd day of week 7, he's starting to tell me about the penultimate vacation that he's been thinking about planning and was going to go on. And I actually felt something snap internally. And I could actually hear a noise, and I had the physical sensation of something snapping. And just like that, just like they say it will, the judgment day came. And we've gone from being gradual to we're about to go sudden. And the guys are lining up in there to get killed by Clint Eastwood, and just like they say it'll come, the judgment day comes. Let the exorcism begin. We're going to excise this vile beast that's grown in there, and we're getting that thing out. And there's a limit at which forbearance ceases to be a virtue. The Pilgrim's Progress, John Bunyan said it, and I look back on this, and it's not my greatest moment, but I do not repent me of all the troubles I have been at to arrive where I am. My marks and my scars and my knowledge I carry with me always. And so I was a part of this, but I just said, Rich, can I see you in your office right now, please? And now, please. And we went in there. He's wondering what the hell's the matter, and I just looked at him and said, try to keep my voice even. And I said, Rich, poignant is derived from pungent, originally with probably the original French. And it means, it's emotional term, and it means not necessarily pleasant, and if pleasant, not overly pleasant, sharp sensation brought on by something. It typically has to do with loss or regret, and it involves an element of wistfulness. It's got a very strong bittersweet state of meaning in English, but it doesn't have the meaning of any of that shit that you think it does. It's not that at all. And that's not what poignant means. And as I now realize, as I relive a little, it was not my finest moment, I went to word number 2. I said, cyberspace, Rich, is all computers. It's to do with computers. It's an imaginary space between computers which doesn't even exist. It's what mathematicians would call a notional space. It is picturing yourself between computers as they talk. But cyberspace is not a place where you can lose something. Cyberspace, you can't lose your fucking car keys in fucking cyberspace. That's not what the word means. It's not a suburb of anything. You can't do any of that. Computers only. Computers, cyberspace. Now, for a while, yeah, I let it go on. I let it be on because it's funny. Because, yeah, it's funny. Now, it's funny in a nasty-ass, condescending, superior, not to brag about kind of way, but it's still funny. But it gets where it's not funny anymore. And part of this is my fault for letting this go this far and not wising up, and that's snotty, and I'm to blame for that, and I shouldn't participate in that, and it's awful. But yeah, it was funny, and yeah, I regret doing it, and it's nasty, and nobody ever thought it would go as far as it's gone. In a way, trying to learn new words is kind of admirable, and it testifies to a good sort of self-improvement. And I kind of thought that was nice for a while. But as I go on, we find that you're not really learning new words. You're just seeing a word you think sounds good and repeating it over and over without ever understanding it or without ever bothering to know what the meaning is, and just trusting that it's got whatever meaning it is in the context where you picked it up. And that's not really admirable. That's just kind of, I don't know what it is, but what it winds up as being is annoying. And after a while, it goes from annoying to tiresome. As it climbs the tiresome tree, it becomes kind of excruciating, which is where we are now. And I just can't take that anymore. And that's going to have to stop, for God's sake, because I can't do this anymore. You know, well, at that point, I apologized for my tone, but I didn't mean it. I'd had months of barbed wire being dragged across my skin. I was crying out for justice or something. But I said, penultimate, stop it. Just stop it. Penultimate does not mean beyond ultimate. It's not some degree of ultimate. It's not something beyond. It's not a type. It's not a degree. It means next to the last. That's all it means. There's no extra meaning. There's no other thing. It's got one meaning in the dictionary, and that's all it means. It's been next to the last. It doesn't mean it's a side thing and we're going to penultimate this and we're going to penultimate that. You sit out, you're talking to me about your penultimate vacation. Well, I've been on a penultimate vacation. I've been on more than one. I didn't like them at all. I don't think you'd like a penultimate vacation either. Nobody does. That's the point. You can't just do this to the people around you. You need to get, words aren't always what they look like. You need to get a fucking dictionary and put it on the middle of your desk where you've got one on your computer where you don't even have to shift your head, and you can look at the meaning, what a meaning of a word is before you start throwing it around like it's some kind of hand grenade. This has got to stop. This must stop now. You've not only got a meaningless thing where you're adding meaning, you've gone the opposite way and you're using the word in the opposite sense. All penultimate means is next to the last. Nothing else, nothing more. It doesn't mean any of that other shit that you thought you mean. Next to the fucking last. Quit throwing a word, please. Quit throwing words around that you get out of your wine magazines that you don't know what they mean. Get a fucking dictionary, put it right here on your desk, and try to have some glimmer, some inkling, some clue as to what in the hell it is that you're saying. I can't do this anymore. I can't do it another day or another hour. Stop it. Stop it. Stop it. We're getting off this. Cut it out. When I originally wrote this, and I've told this kind of story in the past, I originally thought it was kind of a funny story. And I'm now realizing as I wrote this talk, what a supercilious, superior asshole that I was in putting poor old Rich in that position. Now, having said that, I will also say I wasn't the guy reading words and doing this, because he was doing it to other people as well as me. And that I'm a contributor to this, but I am not the only one. So I was hoping I hadn't hurt his feelings, but that was kind of a side thing. I just wanted that to stop. And I do have some idea of what these words are and what they actually mean. If you want to sound educated, I didn't say this, and I'm glad I did. If you want to sound educated, get educated. And when I said that and I wrote that, I thought, I hear my dad talking. That's, gee, if you want something, that's what you want. I had a partner that wanted me to be sure I put his name on the paychecks of the girls so the girls respected him more. And I had my dad's voice running on the same thing. Respect, huh? You want respect? Act respectable. You want a friend? Be one. You want people to trust you? Be trustworthy. You want respect? Act respectable. So you want to act educated? Get educated. So I told this as a funny story for a long time, and I'm seeing now the responsibility that I had with it, but I really felt that. Now, I also wasn't the only one. I hadn't done all these things, and in most ways, was not the offending party. You ran with the ball on that. But the analogy I had was if you've got a neighbor and your neighbor beats his dog all the time, and you wind up watching that involuntarily, and that should stop fairly quickly. And it may be that you're the guy that has to stop it and nobody else, and you hope it isn't, but if it's you, it's you, So that's the way that stuff works. And this thing was not only a public service with him and those words, which I think about now and it's making me cringe, but that had to be done. And I was glad I had to get that to stop. And a little thing from Logan Pearsall Smith. We grow with years, more fragile in body, but you get a little more tougher in the mind, the spirit. That didn't kill you, so that probably the next thing won't. You can throw off the bad conscience fairly easily, or you're kind of used to having one. So that's worked for me. But once again, John Bunyan, the Pilgrim's Progress, says, I do not repent me of the troubles I've been to arrive at where I am, but my scars and my marks and my knowledge I carry with me. That's true with any medical education of any kind. That's true with running a practice. The knowledge comes at some cost. So truer words were never spoken. And it really is, to close on this note, it really is completely true. It's hard to get your foot out of your mouth when your head's up your ass. And, quit using words that you don't know what they mean. And I close with a guy from Princess Bride. I do not think, you keep using that word. I do not think you understand what it means. Thank you very much. Please subscribe.